What would you do if you knew anything was possible for you? My name is Holly Moore and I started an events company 10 years ago from scratch at my dining room table. Join me over the next few weeks and hopefully at the end of it, you will see why anything truly is possible for you. Welcome to the final episode of Series 1 of the Anything is Possible podcast. Throughout the series, we've touched on mental health and in particular OCD. I've shared a little bit of my journey that at 29, I was diagnosed with severe OCD. I had a 5-year battle and finally was in the care of Dr. Costas Papageorgiou at the Priory Clinic in Altrincham. I was able to undergo groundbreaking treatment and 12 years ago became completely OCD free and no medication. Through the podcast, I have touched on what happened to me, but I always believe in bringing messages to life with other people's stories. So today, and I don't think 29-year-old me would have believed this, but I am sat with Dr. Costas Papageorgiou and his recovered patient, Steve Turnock. So I'm going to just begin the podcast by, I guess, busting some of the myths around OCD. I believe passionately it's misrepresented in the media, which leads to misdiagnosis and also a lot of people not being treated and not talking about it. So to start the podcast, I thought, well, my team at Make Events represent quite a wide demographic of the population. So I asked them what they thought OCD was and what it meant to them. So a person who is organised to the extreme, someone who is always needs everything in order or to look a certain way, someone that thinks a lot about cleaning, someone wanting things in a certain way to feel comfortable. They need control and security. OCD is where you rely on certain things in order to feel accomplished and to be able to move forward. So welcome to Costas and Steve today. What I'd really like to start off with, just maybe Costas, you can do this. What is kind of the dictionary definition of OCD?
Okay, well, first of all, Holly, thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to your podcast series. I think a lot of the definitions that you cited there are really consistent with what we know clinically or technically as obsessive compulsive disorder. But the obvious thing to do is to think about OCD as consisting of two parts, obsessions and compulsions, okay? So obsessions are thoughts or images, pictures in our head, but also there can be feelings or urges, okay, that people experience in a very uncontrollable way. They're intrusive. They don't want to have them. And that's at the heart of OCD, not wanting to have those experiences. And these obsessions cause distress and a lot of difficulties with people's functioning. In response to obsessions, people engage with compulsions. Now, most people think of compulsions as checking doors or washing hands, but that's a very small, restricted definition of what compulsions are. Compulsions is anything that people do over and over again in response to obsessions. So, of course, that can be washing, cleaning, checking, but it can also include repeating rituals, hoarding, saving things, making sure that things are just right, just so, counting, but also mental rituals or mental compulsions. You know, when people are going over something and trying to analyze it in their mind to perhaps seek reassurance or to feel certain about something, these are mental rituals.
Yeah. So that kind of also, to clarify again, something that's kind of not widely out there, we've got OCD, but then we've got another form of that, which is pure O. And perhaps you can just define the difference with that for us.
So pure O is just another way of defining a manifestation of OCD. There isn't such thing as pure O. In other words, it's implying that obsessions exist on their own and people do nothing about them.
Yeah.
But it's not true. As you know, in your own experience,
yeah.
you know, people do have intrusive thoughts, but because we don't see them, literally see people doing something about them physically or behaviorally, it doesn't mean that in the mind they're not working hard at removing these obsessions, trying not to think about them, which are mental rituals. So in the literature, if you go online, you will find things like pure O or R OCD or H OCD. They're not like different types of OCD. It's just OCD, but the content of what people think about is defined, whether it's to do with sexual obsessions or harm-related OCD or other forms of obsessions.
Yeah. Okay, so before we go into more detail on OCD and how it manifested for Steve and also the treatments, I just think it'd be really interesting, Costas, just to kind of tell us what is your career history? So you know, how did you then specialise in OCD of all the things to specialise in? Okay,
so it's a long career path, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But I think once I qualified as a doctor in clinical psychology in 1997, I started working in North Manchester General Hospital in Crumpsall, and one of the things that I did there was to start an OCD clinic. So I used to see a lot of people who suffering from OCD of varying degrees of severity, and the primary motivation behind that was because no one was doing that. No one was actually training or delivering clinics for people who are suffering from OCD, because OCD is not just challenging to the individual who suffers from it, but also it is challenging to professionals. It does require that extra amount of time of training to acquire the skills and to be able to implement it in an effective way. So I thought that would have been quite a rewarding professional opportunity for me to start to do that. And then from then on, my clinics grew, and I was able to see many more people with OCD.
So I first saw you in, 2004, I think it was. Might have that right. And obviously was referred to you at the Priory and was put onto your group therapy program. And to put it into context, I first went to Costas in kind of year one, was referred immediately to the Priory. Something that we'll talk about in a bit, Steve, is that, the kind of advantage you have if you are really middle class and can get private healthcare and are referred and your GP understands it. That's what happened to me. I think everyone with OCD will remember the day it started. And luckily for me, I picked up the phone and the GP recognised it straight away. I was whizzed through to the Priory and I met you straight away. And partway into the journey, you suggested this group therapy. It terrified me, and I'm sure you'll talk about it. It terrified me. I disappeared, went on my own path for a few years, which made me worse. And then eventually came back to you and put 110% into it as my last chance. Do you want to just describe at that point what the treatment was like?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what the treatment involved then and what is still involved. Not much has changed. But before that, let me tell you something which your listeners might be wondering about. Why treat people with OCD with other people with OCD in a group? Why not go down the traditional route of offering one-to-one? After all, that's what most people's ideas of therapy is about. And it's true. Obviously, traditionally, we have treated OCD individually, face-to-face, one-to-one. But over time, the notion of treating people together, not because it was just more cost-effective, but it was more clinically effective, it actually gained momentum. I personally thought, to start with, well, you can't treat people with OCD in groups. They need the attention, the one-to-one attention. But actually, I was proven to be wrong. I actually found that when you treat people with other people with OCD in a group, there are things that happen that sometimes don't happen individually, or they take quite some time to happen. And you and Steve would be able to confer that. And it's almost like the penny dropping moments happen a lot quicker, because you hear other people trying things out and you think, oh, I didn't do it that way. Perhaps I should try it that way and see how it works out for me. And I think that's the power of the group of people who are working together for a common goal, which is let's get together, and if we can help each other, we're helping ourselves as well.
Yeah. So I think for me as well, what came out of the therapy for me was that because OCD is so specific and there's a million strains and themes and probably one person has the same, that if there's somebody with something different to you in the group, you can still look at them and go, that's ridiculous. But they're looking at you and going, well, that's ridiculous. And suddenly you begin to think, oh, well, if I think their thoughts are ridiculous, maybe mine are too, in a way. Yeah. So what I'm going to just do is very, very briefly encapsulate what I went through. I'm not going to be as generous as Steve because I'm not going to go into my detail, but Steve kindly is going to. And I'll give you what I believe, whether my view is clinically right happened to me. But I believe I had a low level of anxiety my whole life since being a child that I can recognise now. Didn't like going away from home, different things like that. Really high conscience, would confess anything to anyone that would listen, but didn't realise what that was. And then certain events happened and it was triggered on one day and I just started with these thoughts and didn't know where they would come from. Now, Costas, you've mentioned that OCD thoughts can cross a number of different subjects, from violence, harm to others, sexual, religious. And also my understanding is the subject that would cling on to you is very typically something that is in quite opposition to your character. Because we're going to talk about Steve thoughts, can you just explain that piece to the listeners?
And that's a really important point, Holly, that when you're in a group setting and you hear other people's obsessions, for instance, thoughts or feelings, you might think, that doesn't bother me. Or I don't have OCD. Maybe they don't have OCD. Oh, that other thought doesn't bother me either. And the reality is that you're only going to be bothered by something that is personally relevant to you.
Yeah.
So, for instance, if high standards of hygiene are really important to you, then you're going to be troubled by contamination-related thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
If harm and if fear of causing harm to vulnerable people is important to you, the harm-related thoughts, sexual obsessions, for instance, they might trouble you much more, really. But one of the key features of the group setting is that you actually start to realize that it doesn't matter what we think, whether it's about harm or contamination or wanting things to be just right, just so. What matters is the form that they all take. Because if you remember, and Steve will remember, that in your groups, you all had one common thing, which is the way you experience OCD and you dealt with it, irrespective of what you were worrying about. It was irrelevant, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's what we change. We don't change what we think, because the reality is that what we think is normal.
Yeah.
We all think thoughts like that. And some of your listeners might be thinking, really? Even extreme thoughts like sexual obsessions or religious obsessions? Yes, all of them. And there is enough research out there to provide evidence that our thoughts, no matter how bizarre or strange might be, they're normal. It's what we do in response to those thoughts that actually can contribute to people developing OCD.
Yeah. I think the thing that's also relevant with the group setting is you can't catch OCD. Because we deal with that in week 1, don't we? Which is, I'm here, I've got a fear, as mine was, of harming people. No issues with contamination at all. I can't catch that from them.
Yeah.
So, from a group setting, there's no danger in that whatsoever.
Yeah. It's like in a minute when you share your story, I would those thoughts wouldn't bother me or come to me because that's not my strain. So, okay. And if you can hear a bit of laughter in the background, we are sat in a Sky bar in the Inside Hotel in Liverpool. So there is a little bit of noise in the background. Okay. So, as I said, I'm going to let Steve kind of share my story through his story, I guess. So, Steve, pre-OCD, you're a businessman, you're confident.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, got the trappings. And I'd retired. I retired very early, 46 years old. So focused on some other charity work, focused on family, travelling. And one of the things I learned as I get to near the OCD journey is that OCD loves a vacuum.
It certainly does.
And I guess I had a bit of a vacuum in my head. I'd had OCD since I was 6-7 years old, but sort of more that we might call them the mild forms, the sort of the rattling the doors and sort of the taps, but nothing debilitating, nothing that really put my life on hold, as it were. And I managed through until we reached the spring.
Can I just ask you, did you think that was OCD, or did you just think that's quirk? That's just me, just the way I am?
I've always thought I've had OCD.
Yeah.
But actually, I mean, I'm 60 now. Back when I was 6 and it was 1968, I don't think I would know what OCD was.
Yeah.
And in fact, my parents now go, oh gosh, should we have done something back then? I go, it wasn't discussed. It wasn't even really known about, probably. Not amongst the populace.
Yeah.
So, I've always had that horrible phrase, a bit of OCD. But it didn't bother me. Life was normal. Business was fine. Until the spring of 2018, when I'm on holiday with my wife in Southeast Asia, and it's like the gates of hell opened. And I had no idea what was going on. None. I actually remember Googling the effects on the brain of heat exhaustion. Because I was looking for an answer. I'm going, why? Really?
Yeah.
What's going on? So if I tell you that there are too many to mention here, but just to give you an example of how extreme it was, and I didn't know it was OCD.
Yeah, that's just scary.
I was going mad. I'm in a toilet in an airport, did what I needed to do. I'm stood at the sink, and there are 2 sinks, and in between the 2 sinks, there was one of those little 7 or 8 inch squares to put the paper towels in.
Yeah.
And in walks a little boy. And for some reason, in my head, I went, oh, I haven't just put that little boy in the paper towel dispenser, have I? Where did that come from?
Yeah.
And then, of course, he goes into a sit-down toilet, and then I can't see him. I go, oh, gosh, he's really in that dispenser. Panic.
Yeah.
I left, and then I hung around outside the toilet, waiting for the little boy to come out.
Yeah.
And he did, thankfully, went, oh, he's not dead.
Yeah.
And you go, where did that come from?
And I think
no idea.
The thing, and I just wanted for listeners that are listening, and my team are listening in now, if you don't understand OCD, it's so hard to imagine that a perfectly, functioning adult as yourself would believe. But I just want to give some context to this. If you're a good person and you genuinely believe that you could have just done that, and you do, it is absolutely terrifying.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, as you mentioned earlier, and as Costas pointed out to me when I met Costas on a similar journey to you, through the Priory, almost identical. It picks the thing that's diametrically opposed to you. I've never knowingly harmed anybody in my life. I've never had a scrap in the playground as a kid.
Yeah.
Never harmed anybody. And it's gone, right, great, you're retired, there's a vacuum in there.
Yeah.
Bit about purpose and what am I doing?
Yeah.
And it just went in, and also I didn't know what it was, and it was really, really scary. I'm in Angkor Wat doing the, Jane, that's my wife, you just stand there, and we've got Angkor Wat in the background, and I'm just there with my camera going backwards. And then I go, there's some steps here. What if I've just knocked somebody? Oh gosh, and there's a hole just there. What if I've knocked somebody down that wasn't there, down the stairs, and then they've rolled into that pit? So I am then looking down this pit, and Jane's going, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just...
So from that point, these thoughts, and I can well imagine it like triggered that day in the toilet. And were you kind of on the... when did you first tell your wife? Because I know that on the outside, you can just keep functioning, and then...
It literally happened then.
Yeah.
So it happened every single day, multiple times during that holiday for 5 weeks.
Oh, horrendous.
And I remember we were in a restaurant one night, because my other issue was being in a one-on-one space with somebody and the fear of, have I harmed them when I leave the space? Yeah. So I'd go there was one particular time, which was one of the worst ones, went into a toilet, went into a cubicle, nobody in there.
Yeah.
Go to the toilet, and then as I open the door, I go, I haven't just squashed somebody behind the door, have I? Oh. That was like in the cubicle with me, that wasn't. That wasn't there,
yeah.
And then it's, shut it, all of this going on. Yeah. I then wash my hands, then I go back into the cubicle and go, right, okay, and I'm looking around on the floor for a person lying there.
Yeah.
And I went back into the restaurant, and I'm sat there with Jane, and she goes, what's wrong? I said, I'm about to have a full-on meltdown panic attack. Please, can you go and check the toilet? And she says, for what? I said, can you just check there isn't a body on the floor in the toilet? At that point, you've got a problem. And that happened for 5 weeks. It did spoil the holiday, needless to say. We will go back and do it again. But I came back, and then what happened was, because I was cycling the Alps, I nearly said the Himalayas then, the Alps that September, all of a sudden, I had a purpose again. I was planning routes, I was doing training, and then, do you know what, it just went. And I went, oh, okay.
Can I ask you about this point? You told Jane?
Yeah, she saw it all.
Yeah, so you had...
But we didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
She saw me in bits. She saw me having panic. I don't do that.
But typically what happens there is that people start to develop ideas that they're losing their mind.
Yeah.
I'm going crazy, those sort of things. I'm losing control.
Yeah.
And that's where actually the OCD gains a lot of momentum. And I think for listeners who might be, listening to what Steve was saying before, or your experiences, Holly, they might think, I can't imagine that ever happening to me. Why would I think that? It might not be relevant to them, but the best way to think about OCD is to think about this thing that you don't want to think about at all.
Yeah.
And imagine that happening to you when you don't expect it to happen, and that you can't get rid of those thoughts. And no matter what you do, all the time and effort you spend to get rid of it is not working. Everybody else you're recruiting to help you, all the reassurance seeking from everyone else, from Dr. Google and everyone else, is not working. Imagine that happening several times a day.
Yeah.
That's OCD.
Well, the thing is, Jane did it's all counterintuitive. She did what she thought was right.
Yeah.
She was going, no, honestly, it's okay. There isn't anybody there. I've looked at, of course, and as we now know, because we've been on the course, that's reassurance.
Yeah.
And she's accommodating my OCD.
Yeah.
And actually, it's the worst thing you can do, as we now know. But I didn't know that. I didn't even know it was OCD at the time.
Yeah.
So just flick forward. I seemed okay.
Yeah.
We'd agreed that I would go and see a doctor when I got back, but I went, actually, Jane,
you feel okay
it feels
now?
like it's gone. Cycled the Alps, purpose done.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Back again.
Oh yeah, big style. And I got to the point where I couldn't drive.
Because you thought you'd hit someone.
I thought I was going to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Every bump in the road was, I'd driven around the same roads for hours. When I was cycling, I was doing a big cycle ride with a friend, and we got back. I had full-blown OCD. I knew that at this point. And
how did you know? Had you been to a doctor?
Right, I've sort of flicked forward a little bit. I'd seen Costas. I had your route, fully diagnosed OCD, severe OCD, and I was in treatment with Costas on the program.
Right.
But as part of that, yes, I had to cycle my bike. I had to do the exposure. Be a good boy, like you were a good girl eventually, and we did our homework. So
just for people that don't know, so you went straight into group therapy. So as part of your treatment, we do CBT, we do mindfulness, and we do exposure. Costas, can you just explain exposure to people that wouldn't necessarily know what that means?
Yeah. So exposure, it's nothing but facing the thing that you fear, facing the triggers that set your OCD off, really. And but importantly, what's important about exposure, because anyone can say to you, you suffer from this fear, this phobia, just face it. Well, we know that, but it's what you do whilst you're facing your fears. Can you actually face your fears, that's the exposure bit, without really attaching any meaning or importance to your thoughts? Can you do that without engaging with your thoughts further, without carrying out any compulsions or rituals, seeking reassurance, or using any safety-seeking behavior, for instance? And that's where exposure works. It's not just facing the things you fear, and hopefully, eventually, one day, the problem will be dealt with. No, a long time will pass, and nothing will change if you just do it without the right strategies and techniques in place. And you both know that.
And I think I remember once in the course, because obviously you do what's super fashionable now, mindfulness and meditation. We used to do it in a group setting, but of course I think we used to have to do half an hour on our own every day. And for those again that don't really understand it, it's letting the thoughts go through, trying to get the thoughts to go through your mind and not attaching to them. And I remember coming into group one day, actually quite angry, saying, you're telling me not to attach to the thoughts, and I can't, it's ridiculous, I don't know what you're talking about, I can't do it. But then one by one, as other people were starting to do it, I remember then coming in one week and I got it, I'm not saying it was 100, but yeah.
Really tough.
And so with the exposure, again, when I've tried to explain it to people, is let's say you are like Steve and you genuinely believe you've just knocked somebody down a hole. If the behaviours that you would use to cancel out that thought, like, right, I'll just go and double check. And if you can't, the terror that runs through you when you can't perform those behaviours to convince yourself.
What happens, Holly, is you probably know, if I come back to the sort of the cycling story, I did 80 miles with a friend of mine, and because she was with me, I had that comfort that, you know what, I haven't hit anybody on my bike.
Right.
So there was like tacit reassurance.
And
actually, when we got to the end of because she knew about my OCD, when we got to the end of that bike ride, and we were splitting off different ways, she said, "Brilliant, Steve, well done. I can confirm you haven't hit anybody."
Yeah.
And she meant it
in the kindest way.
Absolutely. And I'm going, great.
Yeah.
But you know what then happened? I had 1.5 miles to cycle home. It took me 3 hours because all of a sudden I went, done it.
Yeah.
And I wasn't being cocky about it, but I let my guard down. And then all of a sudden it was starting to get a little bit dusk, and I thought, and I looked down at something on my bike to just check which gear I was in. And when I was doing that, all of a sudden it was, I was looking back down there, did I knock somebody in the road? So then you go up and go, no, it's all fine.
Yeah.
Carry on. And I went, no, I've just got to cycle home. And I couldn't.
Yeah.
Turn around, went back. Then it started because I did that attach a meaning thing.
Yeah.
And next thing I know, I'm cycling round and then what happens is, you probably know, you go, I used to call it my spiral. I now know it's got a different name.
Yeah.
But I just went down and down and down. And as I'm checking, even more problems pop up. And then I'm checking the checking and checking the checking of the checking. And it just got worse and worse and worse. So much so that what actually happened at the end was, when I thought I'd knock somebody over, bearing in mind there's a grass verge, then the pavement, then there was a drop, I actually thought, I've knocked somebody over, they've fallen over there, so I had to go all the way round, and then I saw there was a tunnel. And what it was underneath a road joining two fields where cows walk through to get from one road to the other. Parked the bike, walked across in my shoes across a muddy field, and I've got a picture on my phone, because if anybody with OCD that's listening to this, look at your phone, you'll see all the pictures of taps and sockets and bits and bobs if that's your thing. So you can check it later. I'm taking a photo of the tunnel, so I can check it later that there isn't a body there. And I go back, and then what I then did was I went, right, okay, I've done another 10 miles. I may as well get to 100. Let me use that as the excuse. It's not really OCD. I'm going to do 100. Yeah. I got back and my wife was in bits.
Yeah.
But the next day, I got her to drive back and check the tunnel, and she did. And that's what we shouldn't do.
Yeah.
So you both found the detached mindfulness strategies that we use in the program really, really helpful, because what they are intended to do is to challenge something that's quite counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah.
When people have thoughts they don't want to have, either people focus on the thoughts.
Yeah.
Why am I having these thoughts? What does it mean? So they worry, they analyze them, or they focus away. They try to push them away.
Yeah.
But detached mindfulness is essentially to learn to let go and leave the thoughts alone.
Yeah.
And to start to relate to them differently. Yeah. To respond to them differently. It's hard because to start with, you got to give up dealing with them, responding to them in the characteristic way that you've learned to do with OCD. But one of the key goals is to leave it alone. Yeah. Hence the name of the charity, Asto, which in Greek stands for to leave alone, to let it go. That Steve set up and I work for. It's hard to do. People don't have to go on meditation retreats for 10 years or whatever. I think if they grasp the key concepts of what it means, and it's all about relating differently to the thoughts. It's this idea that, if the phone rings, you don't need to answer it. Yeah. When you have intrusive thoughts, you don't need to react to those thoughts. Just let it ring. Eventually it will stop. It might ring again. Yep. And it will stop again until eventually you learn how to relate differently and stop attaching that meaning or importance to your thoughts. You no longer start to believe that your thoughts have any importance.
So we always love to bring an episode back to all our listeners, and there might be people that don't know anything about OCD. So when you talk about mindfulness and meditation, something Jacqueline Gold talked about actually in episode 1, if people haven't listened to that yet, she lives with stage 3/4 cancer. So she's breast cancer. She's found meditation and mindfulness really useful for her health anxiety, because obviously this is her second time with cancer. And so to not analyse every single little thing that's wrong with you, she's found mindfulness really helpful for that. So although she's not got OCD, obviously, as a practice, it has helped her with health anxiety.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting for everybody. So we're going to touch on the Asto Clinic in a lot more detail shortly. But Steve, so your, what I always call my end-to-end journey was kind of 5 years. So from 2018, when would you say you became OCD free, and how did it eventually happen for you?
I became OCD free in November 2018.
Yeah.
For the first time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what that meant was I did the 12-week program with Costas. Interestingly, I couldn't make all of the 12 group sessions, and I did 9 group sessions, but 3 private ones with Costas. So I had a bit of a mix, which is quite an interesting sort of little concept. And we built a tiny bit of that into sort of what we do now, which we'll come on to later. Yeah. So I did the 12-week program, and at that point I was in recovery.
Yeah.
But not recovered.
Yeah.
I then had, I think, 3 separate sessions with you between the July and the November.
Yeah.
And in November 2018, out of 40, I scored 0.75.
Ooh.
I remember it well. We really went to the quarter of a point. And Costa said, clinically, you're OCD free.
Yeah.
And I felt it.
Yeah.
I really did. Had my life back, started to function again, but learnt a lot.
Yeah.
And learnt a lot about the provision out there.
Yeah.
Learnt a lot about the lack of provision out there. And it's at that point I went, I need to do something about this.
Yeah.
I'm retired, I've got the means, I've got some skills, so I wanted to do something about it. So I started to think about what I could do. And Asto was born sort of in that moment. I didn't know it was called Asto then, but it is now. Roll forward another couple of years and my OCD did come back.
And was that during lockdown that happened?
No, it was just before lockdown.
Right.
And therefore you go, okay, so did the therapy work then? The answer is yes, it did. But then something came back at me. And to this day, I'm still not sure what it is.
Not a particular trigger?
No, not at all. No, I think I might have let my guard down a bit.
Yeah.
I probably didn't do the homework as much as I should have done.
Yeah.
And also, I like to think, because it's nothing personal to me, that perhaps I came off of the drugs because I was on some antidepressants at the time. Yeah. And I came down the dosage with medical advice. Yeah. Not Costas's, I have to say, but through another route. Yeah. And I part of me thinks that, you know what, did I come off that too soon? Yeah. And therefore I didn't have the defences. And the analogy I used at the time was, because when it came back the second time, it was actually worse than the first time.
Right.
And it felt like there was an army of people there, all tooled up with wonderful machine guns and what have you. And I had a pea shooter.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't defend myself.
Wow. So
and that's how it felt.
Right.
So what then happened was contacted Costas and I saw him privately, reminded me of the practice, reminded me of the things that we discussed. And quite literally within a matter of weeks, I felt better again.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't a long drawn out set of months, was it, Costas? No. But again, I stopped driving. It all came back. And that's where I had this very irrational emotional fear of, have I put babies in the bin? Yeah.
And just you were telling me before, just again to give a little bit of kind of context to our listeners. So you were thinking that you've been overnight, was it putting a baby in a wheelie bin? You were convinced of it?
Yeah. No. I mean, and again, where does it come from? I have no idea. And it started in France. I was on holiday in France and I was putting some rubbish in a bin. And then all of a sudden I went, have I just put a baby in the bin? Yeah. We didn't have a baby holiday in France. Yeah. And there were no babies in my life either at that point. You know, I am now proud grandfather of 2 lovely little girls, but they weren't in my life either at that point. Yeah. And that's when it started. The bin obsession. Yeah. And it was babies. Yeah. No idea where it came from. Yeah. And it came back home with me. And as I was sort of telling you before, the worst episode for me was the blue wheelie bin, the one with the glass, the bottles, the plastic in. I'm there, we live in a converted farmhouse in the porch. I've got it I've got it all tipped out, and I'm scrubbling through this with my wife there, and I'm saying, is there a baby in here? Is there a baby in here? And at that point she goes, Steve, I can't do this.
Yeah.
From what I know about you, Steve, in many respects, if you were to develop OCD, it's not surprising that you developed the OCD that you did.
No.
Because, Steve is a very, very caring human being.
Yeah.
Okay? Not because he set up Asto as a charity, but separately.
Just generally.
He's caring, thoughtful. So naturally, he's going to attack those areas, isn't it? He's not going to attack areas of perfectionism or other things, but it's going to be harm-related thoughts.
Yeah.
And referring back to what I said earlier, we need to remember that OCD is like a problem that only has one face but several masks.
Yes.
People sometimes get confused. I don't know if you remember, you both had your OCD changing sometimes.
Yes.
It felt like a different condition, but it isn't. It's just the OCD changing masks.
Yeah.
And people get confused thinking, I no longer worry about religious thoughts or sexual obsessions. I now worry about causing harm. Yeah. So I have a different form of OCD.
Yeah.
No, you haven't. What hasn't changed is the fact that you still attach too much power and importance to your thought and the beliefs you have about them, and what you do in response to that continues to be the same. Maybe different. You're not checking doors or windows, but you might be checking other things.
Yeah. So you went back to Costas, became OCD free, and
interestingly, I've never actually been finally. We didn't actually do a test at the end. I went, I'm good.
Yeah,
I know.
And I think when you recover, what you have to watch, don't you? I think, you know the things that you have to do.
So I was discharged by Costas, 2.5 years ago plus. So I'm not his patient now.
Yeah. So just to again, so as I mentioned, I was, I guess, said OCD free 11 years ago. That's what sparked me then to set up Make Events. I came off medication. Sure. I believe as well, something Steve and I have discussed is, OCD is different to depression. I believe that in year 4, I was slightly getting depression because I was so sad. I can remember when I first opened up to my boss at AstraZeneca, literally in tears, saying, and I couldn't articulate what was wrong with me, but I said, I just didn't expect my life to be like this. This is a waste of a life. Like, if my head is going to continue like this for the rest of my life, I don't want a part of it. And I'm not saying I had suicidal thoughts, but I was so sad. And that's what eventually got me onto the program. And then when I finished, I didn't see you, I don't think, for about 5 years.
That's right.
And then what happened, I was making some kind of big life decisions that I knew wouldn't trigger OCD, but I knew I needed to work through. And I kind of thought to myself, I think I spoke to Costas via Sue, his secretary, and said, look, this is about to happen in my life. I think it's probably good if I talk to you because you know my whole history and you understand how my brain works. And then I always joke, I just can't break up because I will come and see Costas every 6 months, and I haven't had OCD, but I feel for me, it just is that check in where I am. And actually, I think only a couple of people know this, but last September, so I would say I've had nothing for 11 years. And then last September on holiday, it's always happened to me on holiday. I was on holiday and I just suddenly felt weird. And I got back, don't know if you remember this, and I had this, get in touch. I remember this. I was just, this fear that I'd not had for 11 years came over me. Is it going to come back? And I was on site for an event that day. The team wouldn't know. I just went on site because you're normal. Went on site, ran the event, eventually got to speak to you. And I do believe that all those lessons I'd learned 11 years ago just kicked in because I only told one friend at the time who actually was amazing and was like, it's a little bitch. Don't give it any airtime. Just get on. And I remember lay in bed crying, and my partner, because he'd never seen this before, and he said, I just don't know what to do. And I said, do you know what I think I have to do? I just have to get up and have my day normally. And I went to Barry's boot camp, and I did, and it went within 3 days. But I wouldn't say the OCD came back. It was almost like everything was going really well for me. And it was like the vacuum, the fear. And you said OCD will look for a window. I think that's what you said to me.
It's devious.
Yeah.
Devious,
Yeah.
Incredibly devious.
Yeah.
So, and to your point, the conversation that we've had is, so I think it's 750,000 people diagnosed with OCD. Is it somebody with OCD is 10 times more likely to potentially take their own life? Have I got the stat right on that? I don't want to say the wrong thing.
I think a third of all OCD sufferers suffer with depression.
Yeah.
I've read that.
I mean, depression and generalized anxiety problems are the most common problems to accompany OCD. A lot of people with OCD do have thoughts about being better off dead, unfortunately. Some of them try to take their lives because they've had enough. They've fed up with it because they find no way of dealing with the problem. The problem has dominated their whole life. There's no quality of life at all. But for those listeners who are thinking, I have had thoughts of killing myself or committing suicide, it's important to remember, especially in OCD, that just having the thought alone, it doesn't mean that you will carry out the actions.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't have the intent.
You don't have the intent or the plans, really. Clearly, if people do have intent and plans, then they should seek urgent help. You know, if not their GP, maybe the accident and emergency services, crisis teams around them. It's very important.
Yeah. And I think like anybody resonating, because there will be people resonating with this, obviously we'll put in the show notes like where you can get help, especially for Asto, which we will come to in a minute. But yeah, so for me, you know, I feel very lucky, but I know that I have to watch out and there's certain things that I can't do and stuff like that. But so yeah, when I recovered, my frustration was that I'd been so lucky to get this treatment, and obviously I understood what the value was because I put it through my private healthcare. And as we talked about before, on the course, you know, there was probably 80% of people that you knew would get well, but 20% were maybe not ready and weren't doing. And there's serious homework, isn't there, Costas?
And that is a very accurate statistic. 82% of our
patients.
Is
it? Get me.
Yeah,
these glasses. These glasses I've worn.
It is the glasses.
Yeah.
So 82% improve. The other 18%. People do improve, but not to the same extent. And there are different factors that can contribute to that. And I think you're right. Having the funds to help themselves is important, but it's not the only factor. Because I've seen over 18 years or so people who have had the funds to pay for their own treatment, but it doesn't mean they're going to get better, because just turning up to the group sessions and listening passively, it's not going to get you anywhere. You need to actively take responsibility for your treatments. Do your homework. In other words, the tasks that are set in between sessions and putting them into practice. Steve said earlier that he was very naughty. He only attended 9 out of the 12 sessions, but to his credit, he tried and make up for it with some individual sessions. I would say to all of our patients who participate in the group program, try not to miss any session. Try to put things on hold if you can. Try to use holiday time to actually prioritize getting on with things. Because it's crucial, really.
And with employers as well, I had a really great boss that I confided in, and his wife had actually been treated for depression at the Priory, so he got it, and he let me have every Tuesday afternoon off as a sales day. So I think I managed to attend them all, but in my typical style, I don't know if you remember this, I used to turn up with biscuits for people and things like that. The event planner.
I know.
But yeah, so I think my frustration was that it wasn't ready and available, and I remember thinking if I could get the business, I've got this written down, if I could get the business to make enough money and we could set up a charity called Make It Better and we could fund people's treatment, but I don't know where I thought I'd have the authority, but I could assess who'd have the treatment because I only wanted to give the funds to people that got well. So fast forward to talking to Costas a few months ago, and he tells me that he is in a new venture, which basically he's done with Steve that ticks that dream that I had, which is just amazing. So I don't know.
It's basically Make It Better, but with a different name.
So guys, do you want to tell us what you've set up?
Well, shall I say how the whole thing started? So once Steve had recovered from his OCD and he went away, I heard from him again a few months later, and he said, can we have a meeting? I want to discuss an idea about improving access to effective treatment. So it's not just access, because access to treatment, any treatment, is not good enough. It has to be the right treatment. So he came to my office and he said, I've got this program that would help us be able to help those who can not fund the treatment or those who can partly fund it. And from then on, I think it's become Asto Clinics.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. And it's been quite a journey. I set up a charity 2 years ago, which is Asto Clinics Charity Limited, but we have a trading subsidiary, which is Asto Clinics. So that's the sort of the trading entity of it. And Costas left the Priory in April of this year, but we knew we had some discussions around January, February time.
Yeah.
And it was like Christmas had arrived, because he said, Steve, I'm reshaping my working life. Would you like a day of my time? And I just was in seventh heaven.
Oh.
So not only did I get Costas, we got Sue, who is our program coordinator, who you know
Who's
very well.
Amazing.
Karen as well, who
was my program.
She was in your group, she was in my group. She's fantastic, and all three. So basically,
I couldn't do it without them.
And Karen, for context, is recovered from OCD, isn't she?
Absolutely.
And she facilitates the group program because she's had it and she understands it.
It's totally invaluable. It's a fantastic mix between Costas and Karen, as you know, you've experienced.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I had the Priory team were going to work for Asto.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, it just was superb. And not only that, Sue was then looking after Costas' private clinic, and she said, look, I'm quite happy to do sort of 3 days work, but over 4 days.
Yeah.
So our little charity has got the telephone man between 10 and 4, Tuesday to Friday.
Yeah.
So it's not this sort of dial 1, dial 2, or ring you back eventually. You actually speak to a real person. It's called Sue.
Yeah.
And she's been dealing with patients over the phone and face to face. For 18 years.
Yeah.
So it was just wonderful. What we had to then, so 1st of May we started. And so, yes, it was the usual things that you do in business, the system setup and all the rest of it, which is sort of meat and two veg to me. But to be fair to Costas, you went through a difficult time yourself, didn't you? In terms of, it's a huge change to leave the Priory, where you've been for 18 years, and come and join Asto.
And it's established and everybody knows it.
Exactly.
But that only took a couple of months to go, okay, so we're all good now. And it's working. And what we basically do is we do the program that was run at the Priory virtually.
Yeah.
So it's 10 people maximum per session, and there's 12 sessions. We've made some changes to that, to the original program, which are, the original program, as you may remember, used to have what was called a significant other session.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have 2 of those, one a bit earlier and one later on. So at week 4 and week 8, we invite a loved one or a partner or a brother or a sister or an uncle to take part in the session, but without the patients there, so they can understand what's going on.
So you do it without the patients there?
Yep.
So that wasn't in the old programme, was it? They came with, well, do you know, it's so weird. Yeah. My mum remembers going, and I don't remember. I think my head was that far gone at that point. I can't remember it.
I had my own significant other session. That went very well. But it was after week 6. And really, I thought that was a little bit too late. So we now do it at week 4 and week 8. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think the significant others get their own homework. To do as well. So that's a difference. The other thing that we've added now is we do 3 booster sessions, because sort of that's what I did. I funded my own sessions.
I think I did that as well, actually.
And that's not an uncommon thing amongst people that have been treated by Costas. I know others that I've engaged with. So we're now at month 1, month 2, month 3. There's an hour just for that cohort. Please come. Or not. And so we've got the first one of those coming up in a couple of weeks' time for cohort 1. So so we've made a couple of changes, and we attract people through. I've got a bit of a Google Ads campaign going on. There was somebody recently who wrote an article that ended up in the Mirror. I don't know who that would be.
We'll come to that in a minute.
That's made Sue particularly busy this week. But it's things like that. It's about getting the word out there. And we want more channels. We want more people to come to us. But we only have a finite amount of resource. But the resource that we have is incredibly effective. The program is effective. It's making people better.
And the changes we've made recently with another session with significant others, booster sessions, it's all been done to enable us to help more people.
Yes.
So it's to make sure that people get more out of it.
Yeah.
You know, the feedback from significant others is that it has helped them to know where people are at in the program and how they can support them. And it could be simple things like going out with people to do their exposure tasks.
Yeah.
But it could be other things like, you know what, let me take care of the shopping whilst you spend a couple of hours or so doing this, trying these experiments, these behavioral experiments. But it has helped. So the feedback we've had so far, and it's all geared towards improving outcomes, the clinical effectiveness of the program.
And I mean, also for your loved ones, the people you live with, your family, it's really, really hard for them because it is so hard for them to understand, and I'll overshare here, but me and my family are such prudes, and what we really are. And one time I was literally so bad. I went to my mum and dad's, and I think it was just before I came back and did the group therapy. And I remember my mum bathed me, literally, she's not seen me naked since I was probably about 10. Do you know what I mean? And that's how far gone your head is sometimes. So as a parent, to witness your 30-odd-year-old daughter and you're bathing her and she's crying and she looks like she's losing her mind, that is terrifying. So it is really important. I've actually had somebody contact me this week who's the father is really struggling to understand it, and I get it. I think my mum and dad sometimes not struggle now, but unless you've been there, and I'm sure for everybody listening, unless you've experienced it, it's a really hard illness to relate to, which is why it's so important to get the message out there. Yeah. So let's say at the moment there's somebody that's on the waiting list with the NHS, knows they've got it, has tried a treatment, run away from it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, this podcast is not to plug Asto. I've got no relationship with it other than knowing you two. I'm just a success story from Costas. Yeah. So somebody is in that situation now. What, if they want to speak to you about treatment at Asto, what is the best thing to do? Okay,
so probably the first thing to do would just be to look at our website.
Yeah.
So that's astoclinics.com.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of information on there. It tells you about the journey. It gives a profile of the people involved, the trustees of the charity, the clinical team, Sue.
Yeah.
And at the end, there's a contact form. And you can either fill the contact form in. There's also, you could contact Sue, which is sue@astoclinics.com. And there's a telephone number.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing to do, is to have a little look at that.
Yeah.
Make contact, and Sue will be your point of contact. And she's just a delightful
she's
person.
Lovely, yeah.
She's absolutely wonderful. We're really blessed to have her on the team.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And for anyone suffering with OCD, to be able to speak to somebody who is empathic and understanding. Lovely. She has 18 plus years of helping people with OCD and the skills that she has acquired, clinical skills. Yeah. Most people working in mental health would not do so. So it's an amazing point of contact.
Absolutely.
People shouldn't really feel afraid of that. It is somebody who's going to be listening to them, open-minded, and trying to help them if we can.
Yes.
And so she does a brief telephone screening.
Yeah.
To a script that Costas has developed, so that we capture all of the information. And she also hears things that aren't being said.
Yes.
She gets behind the story, writes up the telephone screening, sends it to Costas, who then reviews it. And if he thinks that they would, do they have OCD from what we can see? And also, would they respond to the group setting? Because we have some suitability criteria.
Yeah.
So you need to be 18 plus.
Yeah.
You need to not have suicidal intent or plans.
Yeah.
And also not registered with another sort of a clinic of some description, whether it's alcoholism or eating disorder clinic.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to commit to the 12 sessions privately.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's 4 things.
Yeah.
Then Costas will assess people.
Yeah.
And that's done with there's a pre-course questionnaire.
Yeah.
Which is a full clinical diagnostic set of measures. So he has all of that prior to a 45-minute consultation where he does a complete clinical assessment.
Yeah.
And either they are approved for the course or not.
Yeah.
Then there's obviously the money conversation.
Yeah.
How is it funded? Because we are a charity and there are funds available to help people that don't have the means.
Yeah.
And we've had everything from people being fully funded through to people being insured. Mm-hmm. We've had somebody on the last cohort paid half.
Yeah.
We've also had another charity funding somebody
Amazing.
on cohort 1 as well. So it's and that's the slightly confusing bit, is that people go, well, oh gosh, so how much is it and can I afford it?
I think whilst we can help a lot of people, and as Steve put it, a lot of people have contacted us, and most people have been offered the chance to be assessed and considered for our program. I think it is important to say that there are certain people who we're not going to be able to help, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Simply because of the nature of an online charity, a small clinical team. So, not only people who are experiencing suicidal intent or plans, but there are people, for instance, who might be under the care of a crisis team or a community mental health team or receiving concurrent treatment for other problems. Unfortunately, we are not their first port of call, really. We don't want to give the impression
we're not
that
a crisis line.
We're a crisis line. We want to help everyone, but we do help the vast majority of people with OCD.
So I think that's really clear, and people can obviously find more details. Just as well, for some context, so I shared a kind of top level of my story and what I believe OCD to be, which got some national press back in October, went in the Mirror, and I shared it amongst my community. And, I know that people have had a bit of OCD, so they say, but the outpouring was unbelievable. I probably got about 50 individual emails. A few people are already under treatment to Costas. I won't say who they are, which was amazing. We obviously put some people in touch with Asto Clinic, but the phrases that they were using is what hit home to me. So, in the eye of the storm, dark thoughts, I thought I was sick, I thought I was insane, I thought I was weird, all these kinds of thoughts. And what I would say is, if anybody does want to reach out to me personally, I'm still happy to chat to anybody that needs pointing in the right direction. And also, again, it's not a plug for Asto in any way, but they are a non-for-profit, and they are funding it themselves at the moment. Make Events have committed to funding 5 people's treatment. That is something that you can do, whether it's touched your family and you've got the funds to be able to do that yourself personally, or whether your business would like to support it. Like I say, no affiliation to it, but I just wanted to put that out there for you. So to wrap up the podcast, Costas, you're probably going to hate me saying this. You'll probably make me edit it, and I'll probably get emotional. But, I think I have to thank you on behalf of me, but also on from my family. We all have a legacy in whatever we do in life. There's a saying I think I've used in the podcast, which is, a legacy is every life you've touched. And from me and from my family, you did genuinely save my life. Honestly, and I think Steve.
Yeah, same thing. I wrote Costas an email. I don't know if he remembers. I wrote him an email saying thank you on behalf of me and my family. And I then said to myself, I'd like to receive an email like that. What must that feel like as a human being to touch somebody's life so much? Now, the thing is, the guy to my right here is a very humble guy. And what he'll be saying is, yes, I might have given you the tools, but you did.
That is what you would say.
And I go, yeah.
Do I sound so repetitive?
But same. Anybody I speak to, and I've spoken to 2 or 3 of his ex-patients, it's the same story. It changes and saves your life. Yeah. So thank you from me as well.
Well, thank you both. And as you both know, I don't want any repayment. I think all that I want is what you're already both doing, which is amazing, by communicating the world about what OCD is like, by developing new services that people can access help. It's the best you can do. So thank you both for teaming up and helping everyone out there who suffers from this devastating and debilitating condition.
Yeah. And to end on maybe a more happy and positive note, it is called the Anything is Possible podcast. Steve, please tell me, it doesn't have to be related to OCD, but what does Anything is Possible mean to you?
Apart from the obvious one of bringing Asto to people.
Yeah.
It did seem like an impossible task at one stage, but isn't. That's actually happening. My sport is cycling.
Yeah.
I have not managed to get up a particular climb in the Lake District. that to me is impossible at the moment. So I need to lose some weight, get fitter, and then that's what I want to do.
Amazing. And if you do, when you do, why don't we do that as a sponsored for Asto? That'd be great.
Exactly. So I know it's almost trivial in comparison to other things that we can talk about, but just on a personal note, that's what I want to do. And the other thing actually, and it's going to happen in January. Many years ago, I set myself a goal of, should I be fit enough, I'd like to ski with my grandchildren.
Yeah.
And my eldest grandchild is 3. And we're going skiing in January.
Oh, amazing. So, well, in the podcast with Train with Joan, she says, anything is possible means to her, you can try anything. Yes. That is possible. So Costas, new career, new direction. What does anything is possible mean to you?
Well, for me, in the context of why we're here, really, overcoming OCD is not impossible.
Yeah.
Okay. It might take a little bit of time, but with the right effort, the right help, you can achieve that. And I think that, people might be listening to this and thinking, oh, maybe just Holly and Steve have managed to do that. It is not true, really. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of people manage their OCD, but please consider how you're trying to overcome your OCD. Don't waste time on things that are not going to help you, but in fact, it might backfire and make you feel that you're not getting anywhere with it because there is no help. So just try the right way to overcome this problem, and it is possible.
Yeah. So it is the last episode in the podcast. It is my podcast, so I'm going to say what anything is possible means to me.
Good.
And I guess the reason for me trying to get this message out there and share this is that if you told 29-year-old Holly that she would be sat here with Dr. Costas Papageorgiou talking about recovery with another patient, I think she'd have been pretty shocked and wouldn't have thought that was possible. So this really is a moment in time for me, and thank you both so much, and I wish you the best of luck with all this.
Thank you, Holly. It's very important what you're doing for us to help us. So can't thank you enough.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.